Hello, NeXT community. So I'm going to try and just give the basics on the scsi2sd version 5.2 card and how I go about configuring it to work with NeXT. I'm not going to give away all my secrets because that's kind of my secret sauce. And you can buy them from me already pre-configured with all the software installed. And it's taken me years to get all this stuff working correctly. So what I do with the SD card, NeXT had originally a 2 gig partition limit. So I'm able to emulate with the new BIOS 6 hard drives. So the first hard drives in the NeXT, well, it was actually an optical drive and 256 meg, painfully slow. Then the big 7-pound hard drives came out. Now we're booting off a scsi2sd card, which is pretty cool. I like to use the Extreme Pro cards, and the reason is they're some of the fastest cards on the market. And we used to be able to get 8 and 16 gig cards. Now I think the smallest ones are 32 gig. But we can still use them. So, SanDisk Extreme Pro 32 gig is what we're working with. Now you can format it to be 512K or 1 megabit blocks. And I have a card reader because you can't actually, using a lightning cable to my Mac Mini, you can, update the firmware. And I use the card reader. I've created basically a 5.2 let me go. Sorry, I'm just kind of winging this. It's been a long day. So I have a master ISO that I call the 5.2 version. And so in addition to this hardware, I've got the software. So there is a scsi2sd app in the App Store, and I'm doing this example on Mac OS, the latest version. And this is what the software looks like, scsi2sd. With your custom XML file, this gives the parameters. And the key here is this particular configuration is 512K, and you want to set 139 sectors in 4 cylinders, or else the card won't be recognized by NeXT. And that's not the normal, but it does work in your custom XML file. And in order to do that, you need to load the tools. And it's the Xcode tool, so you download that from the Apple site. So the XML file is kind of your footprint. And then once you have your custom footprint, you can write it to the device using the software. So first you want to make sure you have version 5.2. If you have the 5.2 card, that's the latest firmware. And it gives you the advantage of having 6 devices supported instead of just 4. So you go into your file, you upgrade firmware. If you have something like the earlier firmware, which is 4.84, you just click upgrade firmware, and then it'll show you down here that your firmware was successfully updated once you highlight your new firmware download. To find that firmware download, you simply go to scsi2sd.com and follow the links. Now there's, I guess we could try and do that here. So from there, you want to right-click the scsi2sd and save it. Don't click the link so that the gobbledygook stuff appears in the HTML or your web browser. You don't need the computer code. You just need to click that link, right-click it, and save it. So that'll be for your firmware. Mark, you don't have to worry about it. Your card's already set up. So I've already taken care of that whole firmware version. Then you have your devices here. So the general settings, I just kind of have picked these different ones over the years. They seem to work for me. You can kind of tinker with them, see if there's a difference in speed and performance for you. And then device 1, it shows the hard drive. And then here's where your sector size comes into place, sector count. And then I just kind of fill in these fields. And then you want to make sure 139 sectors per track, 4 heads per cylinder. Then once you have that, you can click Write to Device. So this will take your custom config file. Now you can toggle off. I've got all these loaded with software, but you can toggle off by enabling or disabling the software here, so that if you want to speed up in performance, that would be a way to do it. Just drop, the additional partitions, because I've got 5 set up. I leave 6 open usually, and that's where I hook up a CD-ROM drive. So that's all your SCSI devices. I hope I'm making sense here, because I'm just kind of winging it. Now with my terminal app, the terminal app writes to this little SD card reader here. And what I have is a master ISO. And what used to take literally weeks of installing software, I can now do in about 364 seconds here. So pretty cool. And so what it's doing, we're using the DD command. And you can freeze this for the commands, but the main ones you need, you want to unmount your disk, and then you use sudo dd if your master ISO image, and then of equals rdisk2 in this case. I've got a 1 meg block size, so I can do either 512 or 1 meg block size. Man, this is just kind of a catch-all here. So, disk utility, to figure out what, to figure out your disk utility, or, what SCSI ID, or not SCSI ID, the SD card is going to be a certain drive number. And then you pick, to format it, MS-DOS and master boot record. Let me click out of that so I can show you. So here's your SD card, okay? And then it says disk 2 down here. So that's where that's your target disk. So you'll want to go in first and erase and format it, and pick from this drop-down menu, MS-DOS FAT, and then master boot record. Okay, and that's what that's going to do, is erase the whole disk and give you a fresh disk to do your DD copy command. So DD copy copies your master ISO image. Mark, in this case, I'm giving you a Dropbox link. So you download my master ISO image, and then you're just going to use the DD command to copy my master ISO image to the SCSI, or the SD card, I should say, in your card reader. And as I say, it'll go through the process, and then it'll say successful, right? So you look, and it'll say, in this case, it's all the records were read. These two here should match. And then it'll tell you how many bytes were transferred in 364 seconds. That's kind of on par. You may get some up in the 370s, but I found it just That's kind of the speed, at least for my Mac Mini. Then you take that ISO image. You want to go back to your disk utility once it's correctly written, right? And you can eject that disk here. You want to eject it. And now you can take your little SD card out of the SD card reader, right? And we'll take this one out. It's already built as well. So you can have your master and ISO, and I'm just going to leave it in there. Pretend that this one is this one. You just pop it in. You now have your updated BIOS, your XML file, which now will handshake with the NeXT, right? So all we have to do is unplug the lightning cable. You have your SD card in place, and go over to the NeXT. Plug it into the SCSI connector on your NeXT cube, right? You don't need to use this. It'll get power off the SCSI cable. Power up your cube or your station. And with any luck, it goes through the whole boot process. And you can log in. I've got that all set up. So you could just buy this without having to go through everything that I explained, which is a little bit complicated. But you can buy my configuration, plug it into your NeXT, power up and go. And then using the DD command, you can read from my master ISO, okay, and copy it so you have a master image of your own on your hard drive. So if you go through on your NeXT and make changes, you can take and do a backup on modern hardware, which is pretty cool. And I recommend doing that right away when I send you it. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to help out. Sorry, I just kind of winged this video. I hope I wasn't too complicated. And have a good evening. Talk to you soon, Mark.